Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're just going to give folks another minute or so to file in here. And oh, got still a few more people coming in from the waiting room.
And a hand raised already. Excellent.
Oh, the questions start now. So
Yes. Well, I guess we should get to it then if we
yeah,
got
we
people that
can
are
jump
interested.
right in. So thanks for coming out, everybody. Appreciate you taking some time out of your day today. My name's Michael Miller. I'm the Director of Marketing here at Carrier's Edge, and I'm joined today by Mark Morell, the president of Carrier's Edge, and we're going to talk about measuring the ROI or the return on investment of training. So just a quick housekeeping note before we get going. If you do have questions, we'd love to hear them. There is a Q&A button at the or icon at the bottom of your screen. You can drop your questions into that at any time, and we'll get to them as we go through the webinar and answer those. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen here now. So we're talking about the ROI of training today, Mark, and this isn't meant to be a math class. We're not talking formulas. We're not, asking people to pull out their calculator and figure that out. But what we are going to talk about is how to do that and what's involved. If you're an owner, I think this is about understanding how safety and training supports your business. And if you're running the safety program in your business, this is really about how you can demonstrate the value that your program's bringing, how you can elevate that value and grow and build the program. So so welcome, Mark. Thanks for coming in to talk,
Thank you for having me as a guest on this webinar.
I guess, on your own webinar. How often
Yes.
have you been a guest on your own webinar?
This is the second time, and it's quite nice because I don't have to do the hard work. I just have to ramble on, and it's your job to control me. So much nicer for me. Yes.
All right, that's good. That's good. And see, from my perspective, I don't have to do the hard work because you're dispelling all the knowledge. I just have to ask the questions. But and maybe to jump in, when we're talking about ROI, I mean, it can be a bit of a buzz term. You hear the ROI of this, the ROI of that. When we're talking about training, what do we mean when we're talking about return on investment for training? What are we really measuring?
Yeah. So the specifics that we're looking at there, um, you want to see what is the value that you're getting. So you're investing in something. What are you getting for that investment? Is sort of at the most fundamental level of an ROI assessment. But in the world of training, and in my perspective is always skewed through the lens of online training because that's what we do. But in general, with training, you want to look at what are the things that you're improving by making whatever change it is that you want to make. Everybody does some level of training at some point now, even the people that think that they're kind of woefully inadequate, that they're always getting hassled from their insurance company to do more training. They're doing something. So if you are looking to do something more, what is going to be the ROI on that? And or what is the ROI? What is that going to be the value of changing something that you're doing? With training, it is an interesting subject because training tends to be kind of a softer sort of thing that is, in some cases, a little bit more difficult to figure out an ROI for because it's not like a lot of other things that the trucking industry, sort of new technology that the trucking industry has experienced over the last 20 years, tends to be or tended to be up until a few years ago hardware-based things that showed their value immediately. If you put trailer skirts on, you see immediately what the value is. You put dash cams in and they prevent one crash or they capture one crash that wasn't your fault, you see the value immediately. You get new brakes, you see the value immediately. Like those kind of hardware things are very black and white. And you also don't have to do anything else with that. You're going to get that value. As soon as you put it in, you're going to get that value. Training isn't really like that because training in a vacuum doesn't necessarily fix things. Training is part of a balanced diet. It is something that is good and can be massively beneficial, but you have to do it a certain way. If you do it the wrong way, it can actually be detrimental. It can end up causing more harm. So, how do you make sure that you get the value out of that? How do you understand where you can get opportunities for value and make the most out of that? And I think we're going to talk about that as we get into it, as we get into things like the cultural elements that come along with that. But in general, it's important to recognize that training on its own is not going to necessarily fix things immediately. You might get lucky. Maybe you've got training, you put some training on something that drivers just really don't understand and it's causing a lot of problems. By educating them, they stop having those problems. You see the value. That is sort of the happy path that once every 50 instances actually happens. Most often, that's not how it's going to play out. So, what you need to do is understand where we can actually look to find value and what else we need to do to make sure that we're really getting that value. And along with that, you have to understand that training doesn't solve every problem. Not everything is a training problem. There are some things that training absolutely can't help you with. So if you, for instance, are having a lot of issues with drivers speeding or following too close, speeding and following too close, common issues that fleets have. If that's happening because drivers don't understand what they should be doing, they don't understand why it's important to not do those things, training can absolutely help with that. But if those things are happening because drivers are getting a lot of pressure from operations, or they have got, they've been given a load plan that is just not feasible, and they're really stressed, no training is going to help with that. Because it's a process issue. The process issue needs to be solved in order to solve the underlying problem. But if you just put more training on it, you can end up making the thing worse because if drivers are already stressed about getting their work done and you dump a bunch of training on them, that just makes the problem worse. So that's a good example of how training can help or can make things worse if it's not applied properly. So there are places where there's a lot of value, and we'll get into how we can figure out that value and what to do about it. But you also have to start, you always have to start by recognizing that training doesn't solve every problem.
Yeah, that's it. That's interesting what you say about that, like that example you gave about the speeding, depending on what the cause of it is, that training may or may not be able to help with that. Is that kind of suggesting the company culture is playing a role in the value that your program's able to deliver?
100%. Absolutely 100%. Company culture is a critical element of having an effective training program. If you have a training program that is approached like a checkbox that you have to do to cover your butt for legal reasons or to make your insurance people happy, and it is just sort of looked at as a chore, it will never be successful. You'll get no value out of it. It will be seen by drivers as a chore that they have to complete. They will grudgingly complete it. They will look for ways to cheat. They will always magically be sick on the day that you have some classroom training program. It just never works. Whereas if you approach it as part of professional development for drivers and as part of a larger package and have training done sort of judiciously and a little bit more thoughtfully, tailored to specific needs, and drivers given time to complete it and supported through all of that stuff, that's when you start to see massive value. I mean, I can tell you from experience that we've seen two companies that look very similar from the outside, similar size, similar lane, similar equipment, and similarly bad safety ratings. put in extended training programs, a combination of online and practical and classroom, and doing sort of all the things that we recommend, and have vastly different experiences. One of them saw very little uptake and driver turnover increase, and one of them improved their safety performance, basically doubled their safety performance, made it way better. So their cost of safety was cut in half. Massive difference in the success rate because of the approach. One of them approached it like it was a chore, and it was like, well, you drivers, you keep hitting things, so we're putting in a training program like it's now a punishment. So nobody wants to do that. The other one targeted it as an investment to help people do their jobs better, help them be more successful, make more money. Massively successful, much more successful that way. So a lot of cultural elements go into that. And that's like a whole other webinar on cultural best practices around implementing training and maximizing your training.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. I mean, it is a whole other topic. I mean, we're talking today about how to measure our ROI, but then once you've got the measures in place, there's these things that you can do outside of kind of your training program to help you see, what these activities, what kind of impact they're having on the value, which is, I mean, that's part of the value of getting your metrics and your ROI measures in place is in intrinsically or objectively, I guess, what kind of effect those things are having. That's
Mhm.
very cool. Um, Something that I hear a lot, not just in trucking, but in measuring, ROI in general, is that it's about generating revenue and when a company views you as a cost center and or you're an expense and you're maybe not directly generating revenue. And I'm not saying having a good training program isn't going to lead to revenue improvements, because absolutely it can and will, but it's an indirect cause and it's hard to measure. But how do you show ROI if you're not directly able to point to, look, the top line number went up?
Um, well, there's a couple of ways there. And so, yeah, I have a mass of different answers that are part of this response. And first, we talked about this a little bit before, and we sort of were talking about, oh yeah, it's not a revenue thing. But then I started thinking about it, and it actually is not necessarily the case that a training program is not going to help with revenue. Okay, I put a whole lot of extra double, triple negatives in there. So let me make this a little bit more clear. Improving training may actually improve revenue, much more than people think, for the simple fact that if a truck is out of service or damaged and in the shop, it's not generating revenue. So it's not that it's going to spike your rate per mile. It's not going to get you, well, it could potentially get you more miles, but what it's not going to do is, a well-trained driver that is not hitting things, that is not getting placed at a service, is going to generate more revenue. So there is potentially a revenue thing in there. That's not the main reason that you do it. The main place to look for ROI in terms of training is expense reduction. And I think that's where most people go initially. Trucking is a service business. You really have very little that you can do to control the top line revenue other than maximizing your available work time. The key is to figure out how to reduce your costs as much as possible and make that work time as efficient as possible, and lower the costs as much as you can. So that's where we're going to look here. And any executive that is thinking about how to run their business more efficiently or how to find some extra profit, find any profit these days, they're going to be looking at how they can cut their costs. And training can dramatically cut costs in a lot of different areas that we'll get to as we get into the details here.
Awesome. Yeah, and that's a great segue, because I mean there's different types of costs that you can measure. You've got the direct costs that are sort of easier to see. You've got indirect costs. What are some of those more obvious direct costs that people should be tracking?
Well, so we're talking about looking at the value of the safety program, and one of the things you want to look at is, what are your costs now that you want to improve? And everybody starts with crashes. right? We want to reduce our crashes, reduce the severity, frequency, total cost of crashes, all of that stuff. Absolutely great as a starting point, but most fleets don't really have that many crashes. So you've got to look for other things as well. Plus, crashes have a lot of different factors that influence them. So there's never just one thing. So you want to look at other things as well. So we want to look at not just sort of flipped into the ditch or spilled all over the highway type crashes, but the normal bumps and bangs, the little smaller things that you don't put through insurance that you just eat the cost yourself, the side swipes and the little things there, those can add up quite substantially. So those things end up being quite significant. We want to look at those as well. We also want to look at fuel efficiency and how we're handling that. Are we getting the most bang for the buck in terms of our fuel purchases? And other things like that are a little bit tougher to measure, but maintenance is an important one. So if you look at the sort of target lifespan of parts and some of the equipment, are you getting the maximum lifespan out of those things, or are you having to replace brakes and tires more often than you should? Because excess wear and tear, because people are not using them properly, they're not being maintained. Do you have excess maintenance costs there? So every supplier has target lifetime for their all of their different parts, and so that gives you something that you can work towards. Another thing, obviously, violations. If you're put out of service, you get fines and things like that. Those are fairly common ones people look at as well. But cargo is something that is very important to keep in mind. Cargo damage is a very controllable cost, and that comes from the quality of the drivers, and that is something that can be improved with training. But taking that to the next level, things like cargo theft and fraud, better trained drivers can make a big difference on improving those things. And they're huge issues right now. Like, do drivers know where to park when they go to the truck stop? Or are they parking their trucks in bad spots that are just opening them up to theft? Are they doing things that are just going to make them susceptible to fraud or theft? Lots of issues there. Are drivers ending up getting redirected to some place where the load is stolen altogether? Like, those are controllable things that are trainable situations. So when we're looking at ROI, what we want to start with is getting a complete set of costs. Like, what are we really spending on all of these different things? Really look at anything that the driver touches, right? Anything that is in any way in the driver's control is something that could potentially be improved by a training program, assuming that it's not other process issues that are causing the issue. If you're forcing your driver to park somewhere unsafe, it's not their fault if they get, robbed necessarily. But in a lot of cases, these are things that training can absolutely help with. So you want to start looking at all of those and get a baseline of your costs in all of those different places.
Awesome. That's amazing. I love that. Um, just thinking about like online training specifically, one of the things um, I've I've read about and I understand is that the savings over like having traditional safety meetings, like in-person meetings. How do you go about like there's obvious like it's common sense that of course it's saving you money, but how does a safety manager go about estimating the costs that they might be saving by not having those meetings?
So that's a good question because it reminds me that that's another place that you want to look at when you're establishing your baseline. So you're looking at what are you spending right now, all of those things that I just mentioned that are your costs that you want to try and reduce. Well, what is your
Mhm.
cost of the current program to try and mitigate that? So if you are using your example, you're not online. So you're only using classroom and maybe a little bit of yard training, but you're kind of bringing drivers in traditional style of doing training. What is that cost? And then you start with this comparison that is, we're investing this much and it is leading to this amount of costs in these other areas. So you want to sort of balance all of those things and you want to reduce those other costs without having to increase or spike your costs of your training. But you have to understand what you're actually spending on things currently. And this is an area where people always undervalue their own time, their own efforts, and all of the things that they're doing. Because if you think about a regular driver meeting, what it takes, say, let's see, traditional Saturday driver meeting, you're bringing people in and you're spending half a day going over something with them. That's a lot more costly than what people think it is. And even there will be fleets that say, well, we don't pay our drivers and we do it in our shop. We set it up there, so we don't have any costs. Well, the false narrative that you're actually not spending anything. You're spending a lot because not only are you giving up your time as a safety professional, you're giving up your time on a Saturday to show up there, but you have to plan for it. You've got to prep it. You've got to get your material ready. You've got to figure out how to get people there. So operations has got inconvenience, trying to make sure that people are there, maximizing the people that can be there. Drivers don't want to be there. Some of them will invariably not be there, so you have to chase them down after. It can very quickly add up to multiple days of combined effort. And when you look at what the cost of a person is per day, it's significant. So when we first started doing our webinar series way back in 2014, the very first one that I did was about ROI calculation. And I dug into the numbers to see what is the total cost of a person, sort of an average safety person, when you add in all of the factors like benefits and taxes and all those other things. What is the total cost of a person? And what does that translate to in terms of a daily cost or sort of a value of their day? And at the time, I got very lucky in that it ended up at about $500 a day, which was a lovely, convenient number to use as a starting point. Now, here we are 10 years later. I would still use that number just because it's such a convenient number to work with. And the cost, I mean, those costs have gone up. But even if you stay with the $500 a day estimate, you put 2 or 3 days of total time across the organization, your time as a safety person planning it and organizing it and actually delivering it and then chasing people down afterwards. Operations getting disrupted for an hour or two here and there, trying to figure out how to get people there. Like all of those things start to add up. If you end up with a couple of days of total effort to deliver a half-day driver meeting, well, you've eaten up couple $1,000s, right? You can easily burn through the equivalent of a couple $1,000s of value on those things. And what have you got for it? You've got a bunch of people that have come. The ones that show up are probably the ones that you're not that worried about anyway. And you're not sure what they've learned because you've managed to get them together, so you're squeezing everything in. They don't really want to be there. Oh, you got to feed them as well, and you've got all of these other hassles that you have to deal with. So how much of that are they going to remember, and what evidence do you even have that they actually learned anything? So you end up with this sort of baseline where this way of doing things for a while was the only way of doing it. So for sure, you get to start with that. And I don't begrudge people doing that when they don't have any other choices, but recognize it is pretty costly. And so you've got all of these different costs, indirect costs, but they're still costs because that time is not being spent on anything else. If you are spending that time organizing a driver meeting and hassling operations to get everyone to show up and then actually doing it, chasing down the people who don't show up, what aren't you doing with your time? As a safety professional, you've got a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge, you've got a lot of expertise. Is that really the best use? Is that the best thing for the business to have you doing that kind of thing? And I would argue that it almost never is. You are going to be way better off putting that expertise to work, doing things like yard skills training, road practice with the drivers, coaching, all of those kind of things, or doing something that builds the culture that's more fun, that gets everybody together and lets them have a better time and builds the community within the business. So understand those costs. And even if you're not putting cash out directly to rent a hall or to pay people for their time, even if you're not doing that, there still is a cost. And if you start using that, I would say use that $500 a day benchmark and start putting some numbers around what does it actually cost you to do these things that you're doing. Then you can start to get a foundation and figure out where you might want to go to do something different and get a better return on that equivalent investment.
That's interesting. So there's like in just in that one example, there's hard and soft costs. There's the hard costs of the $500 per day and the money you're putting out for food and everything and you know what else. And then the way you described it, it almost sounds like opportunity costs. Like
Absolutely.
what other value could you
Yeah.
be adding that you're not adding?
Mhm.
And I mean that can be, I guess, probably tricky to measure, but just recognizing that there's something that you're not doing because you're doing this.
Well, that kind of goes into the sort of second part of evaluating, what you want to do with your safety program or your training program. In most companies, you have to recognize that the the in it's obvious to say the input leads to the output. So all of the things that you're doing right now are what is generating the safety results that you're seeing now. So if you want to see some different safety results, if you want that safety performance to be better, if you want these other costs that we're talking about to be reduced, it's not realistic that you're going to magically make all of those improvements by doing the same thing that you've been doing. You're going to have to change something. So you're going to have to take it to the next level. And if you take it to the next level, how much is that going to cost you and what are you going to get out of it? So generally, people that are looking at expanding their training program are recognizing that they've kind of gone as far as they can go with their current stuff. We've done these things, whatever it might be. We've got videos that we have people watch. We do a periodic in-person meeting, and we do once a year, we do a road test with them. Okay, well, that's now taken you to the point that you're at currently with your safety program. If you're going to go to the next level, you're going to have to do something else. So what does that look like? And how far can you go? The next level of things that you add on, how far can you take that? If you take that, looking broadly, we have gone from twice a year safety meeting to a quarterly safety meeting, and we've replaced the videos with online interactive stuff that people are doing on their own time. Where can we go with that? And how much of an improvement can we expect to see, which is kind of the next part of the ROI. What can we expect to get? If we figured out what we're spending now and what we're getting for it, what can we expect when we go to the next level? And that's another part that people often don't really know because they haven't done it, so they don't know what to expect. So I can say from experience that most fleets can look to have, when they expand their training program, add in online stuff, they can look to about a 10% improvement in their total cost of safety. And that is pretty significant once you know what your total cost of safety is. It can be significant. It can be, I mean, uh, we can see fleets that have, between good safety program and mediocre safety program, they can have a 10 cent per mile advantage if you've got a good safety program, and that can make a huge difference. And if you've got something like that, and if you can make a difference in your total cost of safety that is 1 cent, 2 cents per mile, that starts to add up quite a bit. And it is not going to cost anywhere near that to put the program in, but
Mhm.
it is definitely a significant potential improvement. I use the 10% number because that's a pretty typical of fleets that are pretty good to begin with. We see fleets that are in bad shape that have got, really high out of service numbers. They've got really bad safety performance. They sometimes will have 50, 75% improvements when they sort of get their head on straight and start training people the right way. But you have to assume that if you're thinking about these things, if you're part of this webinar, if you're a diligent safety person, you're probably in not terrible shape now. So you're not going to see a 50% improvement. Anybody who promises that is not to be believed. They're BSing you for sure. So what can you expect? 10%, pretty typical is what we see. We see pretty typically a 10% improvement on sort of total cost of safety, which ends up being about uh, 3 times more than the cost of the actual expansion of the training program. So, you spend $1,000 on a training program, you get a $3,000 value out of it in terms of ROI.
That's not a bad return at all. I'm is there
Three,
a
yeah, yeah.
is there it's a little bit out of the scope of our chat today, but is there a typical time frame that that
That
you'll
is an
see that?
excellent question. Excellent, because people need to recognize that it doesn't happen overnight. It does take time. So where will you start seeing that value? Um, it takes It's generally about a year. You'll see that. Like, it pays for itself within the first year when it's done right, but you won't start seeing the full value of that until generally third quarter, fourth quarter of that year. It takes time to ramp up. And it takes time for you to really see these things, because some of the larger costs, like crashes and things like that, like I said in the beginning, you don't really have that many of them. So you might get lucky and avoid a crash in the first month, but I mean, you also have a hard time really putting a hard value on something that hasn't happened. So you have to kind of look out back over a period and say, okay, our crash rate was this compared to what it was the year previous. But what you will see earlier in that process are a lot of signs that it is starting to work. You will start seeing things like fuel efficiency, vehicle inspections get done better. Roadside, you can see a better performance in terms of roadside enforcement engagements and how all of that goes. Those are things that happen. The number one thing that people see right in the beginning, generally within the first month or two, is a change in the drivers. And this is something that I wasn't expecting, and customers told us this when they started rolling it out, is that drivers start asking very different questions. They come into safety. Drivers, when they're in the terminal, they come and they talk to safety, and they often have questions, but the quality of the questions changes quite a bit. And all of a sudden, they're much more informed, much more educated kind of questions, not sort of the vague or imprecise questions that they were getting before. And I heard the same feedback from 3 or 4 different customers that were very different in totally different areas all across North America, totally different segments. And they all said the same thing. They found it very odd. The drivers come in and they started noticing different kind of questions coming in. They also started noticing drivers talking amongst themselves about content. So whereas drivers would have been just talking about whatever before, more commonly they're talking about specific things related to what the training has been about. So it might be about inspections, it might be about cargo theft and fraud and things like that. Whatever it is the company is focusing on, drivers are more engaged in those things. So that's not a hard number. You're never going to say, oh, well, it's worth this much to us. But it's a sign that you're heading in the right direction and that you are going to start seeing the fuel, the cargo claims, and all of those other things start to get better. And by the end of that first year, you're going to see that you've made a real significant change there.
That's neat. Yeah, I guess if you give people something interesting to talk about, they will talk about it. If it's
Yeah.
relevant to them, if it's not sort of talking down to them or telling them things they already know, and
Well,
it's
there's something that we discovered about that, and it kind of makes sense once you realize it. And this is getting off topic, so I'll keep it short. But trucking in generally is a dramatically undertrained industry. There's so many people that kind of learned from watching someone else or picked it up along the way. There's so many of these truck stop professors that drivers have learned from. So the vast majority of drivers that have been out on the road for a long time have still got massive foggy areas where they don't really understand things because they've never really been educated properly on the discipline and how to do it the right way. So when they finally start getting some of that, they start to get some of that education, then the fog clears and they're able to see it a whole lot better. They feel better about their jobs. They have a better sense of what they're doing and more importantly, why they're doing it. So they just approach things a whole lot differently. And that's one of the trickiest things from an ROI point of view because it's really hard to put a number around. But over time, it does start to improve things like driver retention, driver engagement, and culture, and some of these other things that are really significant elements and important things that fleets are generally pretty interested in measuring and staying on top of.
Oh, excellent. I want to come back around for a sec to some of those invisible or hidden costs that we're talking about. Now, like, what are some of the costs that we haven't talked about already that maybe people should be looking at? I think of things like burnout and admin time and what that eats up budget wise. But that maybe people are either not aware related to safety or are probably underestimating the impact that they have on things the
Yeah.
safety program can help.
Well, burnout's a really good one. I very rarely come across a safety professional who is not overworked, who is not trying to do way more things than they can possibly do. You don't see, I'm old enough to remember the old Maytag repairman ads from the 80s with the Maytag repairman who was bored because he never needed to do anything. Uh, you don't see that in safety. There's no such thing as a safety professional who's bored. They're always killing themselves. So that is absolutely an issue to pay attention to is burnout and the related health things that come out of that. And people don't think about that too much because this is something that we see in the Best Fleets to Drive For program. Stressed safety people that are always sort of on the edge and feeling they're sort of sinking, that they're underwater, that translates through to drivers. Like that whole vibe translates out to drivers, and that ends up having a negative effect on the entire driving force. Whereas the opposite of that, the safety people that have got things sort of organized and they're staying on top of it and they may be busy, but they're feeling like they're in control, that also permeates the entire organization and drivers pick up on that as well. So there's a lot of kind of softer things that come out of that that are very important to pay attention to, that the general health of the organization will improve as safety people are better able to do their jobs. And that's something that people don't even really think about. If you're a safety professional and you're not scrambling from one thing to another and you actually have some time to think, what are the things that you're going to be able to do that really help the business on a larger scale? So there's a lot there. Um, Other hidden costs that people don't think about, one of them that came up, I know we talked about from one of the interviews that you did, was driver retention and the
Mhm.
the the fact that sometimes the drivers that have performance issues and you're leaning towards terminating them, but it really is just a driver who doesn't know any better and who needs to be educated. And if you can educate that driver, if you can train them properly and avoid having to terminate them, that saves the company a lot of money. I mean, even if you're able to take your terminations and cut them by a third, that's going to be significant. And we've seen that. We've seen people that are able to cut it by a third. We've seen people that are able to sort of reduce these things in really appreciable amounts that save them significant money. And then the third one sort of in there that's uh, a very important one to keep in mind is I sort of in my head just sort of put it in the bucket of legal stuff, which is everybody has to be thinking about legal ramifications if they have a crash. If you have a catastrophic crash, and yeah, it doesn't happen very often, but the severity is such that you don't want to do anything to make your situation worse. And you have to be thinking about, are your drivers sufficiently trained? If you had to be in court tomorrow to talk about what you're doing, what's it going to look like? And if you had to be defending your current safety program and your current driver training program, how well are you going to be able to do that? And part of what the legal profession looks at plaintiff's bar that we all love to trash, but they are very creative and they are
Right.
going to look at what other people are doing. What is the standard within the industry? If the standard within the industry is one thing and you're doing something that is not anywhere close to that, that's going to be the entirety of the case. So every time we talk to lawyers about the situation and what's happening with nuclear verdicts and all of those things, it never comes down to the crash. It always comes down to driver training and documentation. How do you train and qualify that driver? How did you prove that you did it? And you have all of those kind of things. So legal protection is definitely something to consider. And in not a few cases, good training and good documentation of that training has been the make or break point in a case.
Yeah, that would be a huge one. Oh my gosh, if you can avoid a nuclear verdict
Yeah.
with the right program, wow. That's excellent. Before I jump on to the next sort of section, I just want to remind everybody, if you do have questions, you can drop them into the Q&A. There's a Q&A button or icon at the bottom of your screen. You can drop your questions in there, and we'll be happy to get to them. If you don't, I've got a million more to fire away at Mark here in the rest of our time. But if you guys have anything specific, please do let us know by dropping those in there. Um, we talked about this through the course of the what we've discussed so far, but I want to maybe zero in on it a little more in terms of like if I'm just getting started to figure out what do I measure, what should I be benchmarking if I have none of these baselines yet? What are some of the key metrics that you would say I should start with, and I should start trying and get that baseline on?
I would start by just looking at the time that you're spending right now. So that's the first place that I would go is and going back to the simple $500 a day thing, what is the cost of what you're doing currently? So what does it take you to put together a training program and you apply that and that's sort of like the regular thing. But look at all of the different things that you're doing. So look at things like certification training, like whether it's hazmat or some of these things that people have to keep doing on a regular basis. So forklift or fire safety, you always have to keep renewing drivers on these. And those are really inconvenient and painful because sometimes you only have one or two people that need it. So what do? Do you make them wait, or do you do a training session yourself for one or two people, or do you send them to some outside place to do it? So start with those kind of things, and you can look at the cost and you can look at the time that you're spending on it. I would then look at orientation, which is another good place to think about what are you spending per driver on orientation. How many days is your orientation? What are you doing? If you think about it in terms of time, that's an easy place to start because you can kind of do it yourself. Then you start bringing in other people to say, what is our total cost of maintenance? What is our total cost of cargo claims and theft and fuel burn and all of these other things? And start getting a baseline on all of those things, total cost of spill cleanup, anything that happens that is in any way safety related. What are you spending on that? And then start looking at what does that translate to in terms of a cost per mile? Because trucking, everything runs per mile. I would focus very specifically on all of these things, convert them into dollar amounts. This is an important part uh, of this ROI calculation because in the safety world, we tend to have an awful lot of proxy calculations that we use. So we will look at things like DOT reportables per million miles, or we look at CSA scores, or other things like that that are metrics. And safety people get very focused on that. We always want to have our CSA scores in the top 10% of our category and things like that. And we want our DOT reportables and preventables at this number. But those things are all proxies for actual cost. So what you want to do is sort of push those away and look at what your total cost is and break it down into a total cost per mile. And that's what you can start to use as a baseline for improving, and then start seeing uh, what we can be doing to improve some of those things. And if we were to improve it, what would the value be? So if our total cost of safety is, I don't know if it's, let's just say for sake of argument, is 20 cents per mile. Hope it's not, but let's say it is. If you can drop 10% of that, okay, that's straight into the profit, because all of those things are that there's not really a corresponding cost. If you've got that, if you've reduced that, that just goes straight to your bottom line. It's profit that you're not making now because you're spending it on these other things. So if you can start converting that into profit instead of collision and spill cleanup and whatever else, then you've got a lot of value there. So I would start with those things, and when you get to the cost, forget about all of those other proxy metrics. Forget about going in and asking. Don't go to the executive and ask for money because you want to improve your DOT reportables by zero point 0.2. That doesn't mean anything to finance. That doesn't mean anything. You're putting a lot of work onto somebody else to then try and figure out how valuable that might be. And the executives often are not going to be thinking about that. So I know that's sort of jumping into one of the other things that you wanted to talk about is how do you make that case?
Mhm.
And that's the number one thing in making that case is get away from those proxies and get into hard numbers.
That's good. No, and it's a great segue because I do want to talk about that and dig into that because I know there's going to be people on the call here and people who are listening to the recording who are coming at this from the perspective of I need to, I want to increase my safety program, so I've got to sell this either to the ownership, or if you're in a private fleet, maybe you're selling it to a department head or something, but you've got to, you're trying to demonstrate the value so that you can either, grow the program or just frankly, demonstrate your worth and what the program's worth is. But I'm wondering at a sort of a macro level on that before getting into the specifics, like if I'm in that executive or that ownership space right now, I'm thinking a lot about the economy. Like
Mhm.
there's a lot of sectors that are really tight right now. There's a lot of weird stuff going on, and like volatile is the the term that sort of comes to mind. But does it change, or how do you go about showing the value when you're an environment where everybody's watching every penny spent because nobody knows what's going to happen.
I think it makes this stuff even more important. And there's way more of a business case for an expanded training program in a situation like this. And it's funny, we've been in this, we've been doing this long enough that we've been through some downturns before. Never one this long, of course, but we've definitely been through some downturns before. And we've seen the other side of that when it spikes and everything is fabulous. And the funny thing is, people actually, I'm looking very broadly across the entirety of the continent, they care less about safety when times are good. Now, everybody will argue all the time that safety comes first, and it's certainly important. And if their insurance company is anywhere within earshot, then of course safety is the most important thing. But the reality is, in 2021, when things were booming, people were not as worried about safety because they're making so much money they didn't care. If a truck gets dinged up, all right, they weren't making so much money, it didn't bother them. But when all of a sudden the rates are not through the roof and freight's harder to come by, you have got to be positioned to capitalize on every opportunity that comes your way. And at the same time, you've got to cut every possible cost that you can to make sure that you're optimized to capitalize on that revenue. And that means making sure that you're not using the proverbial stepping over a dollar to get to a dime. So, don't save $100 or $1,000 on training and then expose yourself to a $10,000 or $100,000 loss, which is what happens. People cut their training and like, oh, we got to save $200 a month, but then they end up with their freight being stolen or their equipment flipped in the ditch or spilled all over the highway, or they've got all kinds of other costs that they're not seeing. They end up in a nuclear verdict because the jury finds out that they cut their training to save a couple bucks. There is no business case for reducing those investments. It just kills you in so many other ways. The thing to focus on is what are the larger expenses that you can control. You can't do that much about wages. You can do a little bit of adjustment here and there on driver rates, but the market is going to tell you what you can pay on that. You can't do much of anything about insurance. Insurance is what it costs, and it is what it is. And even fuel, you can do a little bit to hedge on it, but you can't change the cost of fuel. What you can do is be as efficient as possible in your fuel usage, maximize all of your operational things to make sure the drivers are planning their loads properly, that they're maximizing their hours, all of those kind of things, and minimize other costs like all of the things that we were talking about. The last thing that anybody needs now is a whole bunch of preventable dings and dents from drivers not paying attention as they're going around corners or they're backing into things. That is completely preventable. And I mentioned earlier the fleets with a good safety record having a 10 cent per mile pricing advantage. That comes from KSM Transport Advisors, and they have all of that data and do that research. And I'll tell you, a 10 cent per mile difference now, that's the difference between being profitable and being out of business, right? It is that tight that you cannot give up that kind of share. You can't give up 10 cents per mile and still be in business these days. So focus on the things that you can control and the larger things that you can control. Don't be nickel and diming on some small training things that end up biting you later. Now, I fully appreciate that there are times when you don't have that option. You don't have the cash today. You have to kick that can down the road and hope for the best later. Sure. If you're not in that situation and you are looking at how can we get through tight times and be best positioned to, number one, survive it, and number two, come out of the gate running when the thing ends, investing in business efficiency training, better trained drivers, all of those kind of things, better quality, more efficient drivers, all of that is going to be much more helpful for the company in the near term and better position you to ride out the next 6 months of it not being much better. But then when the industry turns, you're going to be laughing. You're going to have all of your processes in much better shape. You're going to be sitting on a safer fleet with better turnover, better culture, and you're going to be able to beat your competition there for sure.
That's excellent. Yeah, that foresight and that forward planning. It's almost like, in an economic environment like now, when it's a little more challenging, that's almost kind of the ideal time to start converting some of those measures to that dollar figure that you're talking about,
Mhm.
and start applying that. Well, that potential 10% improvement on your total cost of safety and what that looks like, and then that's a nice sort of business case to present to whoever you have to present it
Well,
to.
that also gives you a little bit of a plan for prioritizing because you start
Yeah,
looking at those costs and what you're currently
yeah,
spending now and how much you're able to mitigate those. You're going to find places where you've got excess costs that you want to do something with, but that allows you to pick something to start with. And one of the important parts of maximizing ROI is figuring out where to start so that you can start seeing the value of those things. So don't start with something that's not a significant cost or significant preventable cost. Start with something that you can do something about. If you're having backing incidents or speeding or something like that, something that you're seeing that's coming up as a significant issue, okay, let's pick that and start with that. And that's where you're going to show the ROI and then you build on it. It's a bit of another webinar as well, but don't try and do everything all at once.
yeah.
Expand the program in a bit, monitor it and make sure it's working, expand it a bit more and grow it from there. That is also part of building a good business case when you go to executive is don't say we're going to change everything under the sun today and it's going to cost a bit, but 5 years from now we're going to see a great benefit. Nobody's going to say yes to that. What can we do today that's going to be smaller, that's going to prove that it works and that we can get some value out of and then build on it from there? Do it in chunks.
That makes, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And how you use the the baselines and the measurements that you're pulling together. Is there any a couple of quick questions before we run out of time here? And I see we've got one unrelated question in the Q&A to the topic, so if time will come around to that. But um, we talked about the hard dollars, as you want to convert everything to hard dollars because that's what management's looking for. Are there any other metrics that you think are more important than others to management, or does that totally vary based on the company priority?
That will 100% depend on the company.
Yeah.
It'll depend on what the issues are. I mean, now you can also look at, there's so much more data available now than what there was before. And you can look at ELDs and telematics and cameras and see all of the things that are coming from there to start putting all of these events and activities together and talk to finance and figure out where the costs are, what these things are costing on average. And from there, start to figure out where the priorities are. Sometimes people have issues that are on cargo damage. Sometimes it is roadside issues and fines for being placed out of service. It depends entirely on the organization. But you start looking at those numbers and include, I'm realizing I should have included this way back earlier, but when you're figuring out those numbers, include time spent as well. It isn't just
Mm,
about the hard cost. So we're talking about that in terms of safety meetings, and you have to figure out, the value of your own time in addition to the hard costs that you have. But that goes for all of those other elements as well. What is the amount of time that is eaten up dealing with claims, that is eaten up processing repairs or trying to put drivers into other trucks because their truck is damaged and like all of those sort of headache things that you have to deal with. Every time there's a hard cost, there's going to be some soft costs attached to it. Start putting some, even if they're just ballpark numbers to start with, you can validate those as time goes on. But look at the costs, look at the soft costs, the indirect things that go along with it, and from there, you'll start to see where there's some low-hanging fruit that you can start working on and kind of prove the value of your plan and then build it from there.
that's terrific. I love that. So if I'm just getting started in this and I want to do this, it sounds like, what I need to do is I need to, I need to take some time to audit my costs, those hard costs, figure out the associated soft costs, converting that stuff into dollars as best I can. We want to link it to our company or our corporate objectives so that we're connecting the dots for the executive, and then that leads to picking the right metrics that we want to focus on to change and demonstrating the value. Is there anything else I should be thinking about as I'm getting started?
Um, the one other thing that I would say for safety professionals that are starting to go down this road is don't assume you have to do it all alone. That's one thing that I see some people get sort of tripped up is like, well, I don't know what these costs are, so I can't do it. Or I have no idea what potential improvement we can see, so I don't even know how to start. You can get help. So we can help in terms of providing some other metrics and sort of baselines of what you can expect in different areas. But your own finance people will be able to fill in some details as well. They'll be able to give you an equivalent daily cost per person that they want to use. And maybe they don't like the baseline that I use. That's fine. They'll have their own, or they can start to give you some of those numbers and fill it in. So don't assume that you have to do it all on your own. There's help available for sure.
That is great advice to sort of finish with. That's good. We're not alone. We've
Mhm.
got support around us. Yeah, definitely don't try and do everything yourself. With our last few seconds left, we haven't gotten any more questions, and we do have an unrelated question, but I'm going to throw it out there, and it looks like it's related to our English language proficiency test that we did release a little while ago about whether or not there are plans for other languages for that.
Yeah. Are we planning to do any other languages? Not. any new languages in addition to what we have now. So English, French, Spanish will be the languages that we stick with for now. Uh, the, we have contemplated other languages. We did do an experiment where we had some courses in Punjabi, and it was not successful. It was an expensive flop of an experiment that I'm not eager to go back into and try again. So we will be sticking with English, French, and Spanish as our core languages.
Terrific. And for those of you who are customers and don't know about that one, there is an NELP test that you can have a look at and take advantage of in the system. If you're not a customer, by all means, reach out and get a free trial and have an opportunity to have a look at that as well. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. And thank you, Mark, for sharing your wisdom and giving us some good things to think about. There will be a recording of this that will go out to everyone who was here today and who couldn't make it. If you do have any follow-up questions about anything we talked about today or anything related to safety training and Carrier's Edge, there's the contact information on the screen there. You can reach out to us and we'd be happy to chat. But thanks everyone for coming today and have a great rest of your Tuesday.